So I want to talk about truthfulness and why we are all liars this morning. And don't worry, I'll share some of mine as we go along. If you're just joining us, we've been talking about this list. Theravadan Buddhists tend to love lists. Helps us, I guess, to stay organized and probably help the tradition to exist for 2,600 years. And one of the lists is not actually as popular in Theravadan Buddhism. More popular in Mahayana Buddhism is the 10 paramis. Sometimes they're called the 10 perfections of the heart. And those 10 qualities are generosity, ethical integrity, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, resolution, loving kindness, and equanimity. And it's said that the Buddha perfected these 10 qualities actually over the course of several lifetimes. So if you're feeling like I'm far away from perfecting these, it's said that the Buddha perfected them over, and I quote, 4 incalculables and 100,000 kalpas or world cycles. So it took him 4 incalculables and 100,000 world cycles. So you've got a little bit of time. And I like to think of these as guiding principles. And like if you kind of distill the Buddhist teachings down into 10 qualities, which are qualities that we can actively put into practice, I think this is a pretty helpful list. And today we're going to talk about truthfulness and why we're liars. When approaching this topic, I kind of have 2 sides of thought. One is the first thing that comes to mind, which is talking about dishonesty and lying. I think societally, when we grow up, one of the first moral lessons we learn is to not lie. And so when I think of truthfulness, I can't help but the first thought, maybe because it's more of my conditioning, is to be around the opposite of truthfulness is lying. And I actually want to talk about that today because I think it's a part of what this practice is around. And then I think the other piece is something maybe a little bit more deep, which is not like better deep, but more subtle deep, which is to look at self-deception and how we sometimes are not quite clear on the place we're operating from, or maybe not conscious of the place we're operating from, and sometimes we are, but are operating against maybe our values or what we want to operate from. I find this to be a very fascinating part of being a human, is that none of us, I think, would say that we want to be liars, yet 3 of us are liars. The rest of y'all probably aren't, but 3 of us are. So, so looking kind of deeply at how do we operate kind of beyond our values at times, and how does that happen? And what does maybe the Buddha say about that? So we'll start with being liars. Evolutionary researchers state that tactical deception, or lying, or as they define it, the misrepresentation of the state of the world to another individual, may allow people to exploit what they call conditional cooperation. So evolutionary researchers say there is some evolutionary basis for lying, and it's to try to get people to cooperate. And I think that's such a kind way to describe a liar, tactical deception. It's like getting caught in a lie and being like, I wasn't lying, I was tactically deceiving you to gain your cooperation. And I think that that's helpful to know, because I think that a lot of the real reason why I do what I do is because there is some reason, right? There's some benefit. It may not be a constructive benefit over the long term, but there is some, at least usually, immediate benefit to doing it. Like I don't have to go down the road of the argument. And I point that one out because I also have a 4 turning 5-year-old at home. When I was starting middle school, I made up the lie that I was a Golden Gloves boxer. I was a Golden Gloves boxer. And fortunately we didn't have Google, because I later found out, I think just today, found out that Golden Gloves boxers start at age 19, and I was in 6th grade, so. I also think that I probably accidentally called it Golden Globes boxing some of the time. So. Good thing no one was fact-checking me. So I told this lie, and I actually maintained this lie for a while. It kind of dissipated over the years, but every once in a while it would pop back up. Is this kind of old, familiar lie. And so why did I do this? Just like I asked y'all, why did you tell that lie? Why did I tell this lie? I think in retrospect, I wanted people to think of me as someone that had a special gift. I wanted people to think I was tough. I wanted to belong. I wanted people to think I was cool. I think there are a lot of common reasons why we lie, and I want to share some of the Buddhist reflections. I don't know if this is canonical. I don't know if this came from the commentaries or this has just been passed down through teachers, but this is something that I've heard over the years, is kind of this Buddhist description for different reasons why we might lie. And of course, that it's Buddhist means that all of our lies are based in what are called the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. And so I started by saying I think there's some reason why we lie that's not, I think, inherently bad. I just think that it's adaptive. It's to get some immediate need met. I start with that because we're about to go down this pathway of talking about why you lie is based in some form of greed, hatred, and delusion, which sounds very religious to me, but maybe we'll break it down. I think it will be helpful. So from the Buddhist text, or from these Buddhist teachers, the worst form of lying karmically is lying based in hatred. And they say that lying based in hatred is lying for the purpose of wanting to harm someone. And that's worse than lying based in greed and lying based in delusion. And so lying based in hatred means that oftentimes we may lie to want something bad to happen to someone, to want something good to not happen to someone, or to take something good away from someone. This could even be their reputation. We may gossip about someone in order to hurt their reputation in the eyes of someone else. And I'm pretty sure now that I'm talking about this is in the canon, and the Buddhists kind of saying, this is the worst kind of lying because it's to try to cause harm. It's to try to hurt. And we all know what it's like to, or maybe, hopefully you don't, but I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that. Right? You hear from someone that's been pissed off at you, and they finally just let it come out why they're pissed off, and it's because someone else told them something that you did or said, and it was misconstrued and it wasn't right, and it's just a cause of a lot of rupture in our relationships. Can be this kind of, in that example, gossiping. Another reason why we lie from the Buddhist perspective is based in greed, which is we want something for personal gain. We want someone's admiration or their respect, like my Golden Gloves lie. We want to get something, so we tell someone a lie in order to get what we want. And then the least karmic impact comes from delusional lie. And these are what we sometimes call lies of convenience. These are the irrational lie or the compulsive lie, the interesting exaggeration, lying for the sake of a joke. You ever had that experience where someone calls someone out and they say, I was just joking. These are the delusional lies. Now, you might be thinking, is it never appropriate to lie? It seems like the Buddha is saying, okay, don't lie based in hatred, don't lie based in greed, don't lie based in delusion. And, the Buddha doesn't really tell us how we should act. He asks us to look into what is in our heart and what is the underlying motivation behind our actions. And so to back up a second, when we talk about karmic impact, one of the things that the Buddha is talking about is not like there's this piggy bank in the sky keeping track of all the bad things you do and all the lies you've accrued and that it's going to come back to you in some retribution one day. That's not actually the Buddhist perspective on karma. Karma simply means cause and effect. So what happens when we lie, what happens when I lie, is now I have the stress of having to keep it up. Right? Now I have the regret of living with it. Now I have if my lie gets discovered, the betrayal or the mistrust that's been developed between me and that other person. So the karma is inherent in the consequence of the action. Does that make sense? So lying based in hatred to hurt other people, the Buddha is saying the consequence that's inherent in that is worse than maybe lying to just gain something or to get someone's approval, which is worse than maybe talking about Santa Claus being real. I still think he is. I think also we need to lie sometimes when someone's safety is at risk. I don't think we need to be moral absolutists. Actually, I think that Buddhism in particular is situational. And it's really understanding that we try our best and there's no right and wrong way to make it through this world. The Buddha kind of throws out this idea that there's a right and wrong, which is kind of scary, but then he saddles us with this responsibility, so you better be fucking paying attention. Really looking at your motivations behind your actions and your speech, because you're swimming in the current that you're creating. That's what karma means. So good news, bad news, the Buddha is saying, you're not going to get it right. That's not the point. I'm not going to tell you certainly how you should live. But then you've got to really look into your motivations behind your actions, behind what you say and what you do, and be willing to swim in the current that you're creating. So I think sometimes we lie when someone's safety is at risk. Sometimes we lie, in quotes, to protect our privacy. I don't think that having privacy is the same thing as dishonesty. I think we get to choose what we want to tell people a lot of the times. And again, it's very nuanced, so we've got to kind of look into our heart to see, am I trying to kind of withhold information that might be for some egoic need that I have, or is it that I am trying to protect my privacy here? And so I read this article recently about a monk. I don't remember the situation. I don't know if he even went into details, but he said, as a monk, they were asking him, do you ever lie? And he's like, yeah, I do. And he said, you can't really get through life without telling lies. And he says that whenever he lies, it's usually maybe for someone's privacy or, one of these circumstances to protect someone's safety or so on and so forth. He says that he tells the lie with an awareness that he's not telling the truth. And he described, I love this visual, he described it as like wearing a rope around your waist and going swimming in murky water. He's like, I'll tell a lie if I need to. He's like, but I'm wearing this tether that helps me to know I'm telling a lie right now. Right? Because maybe it is murky water. I know that it's easy to kind of not be quite clear with myself when I'm being dishonest about something. And so that brings us up into a transition. to maybe not be quite clear with myself, I want to talk about truthfulness as self-deception. And that's why I like this monk's story of he wants to maintain the truthfulness that he's telling the lie in his awareness. Does that make sense? I thought that was really cool. I think from my practice and my study of Buddhism, I feel as though truthfulness is central to the quest for liberation that the Buddha is teaching. The word is satya, and many of y'all may have heard of the Four Noble Truths, Arya Satya. And so truthfulness, I think, is really central to what the Buddha is teaching. And I think it's not a capital T truth. It's not a doctrine. It's not a philosophical truth that the Buddha's after. It's about seeing clearly. That when we're able to really examine and confront the ways in which we find ourselves in repetitive patterns of suffering, and not just confront the ways in which we find ourselves in repetitive patterns of suffering, but also confront the ways we consciously and unconsciously participate in those patterns of suffering. And not only confront the ways we participate in them, but also confront the ways we then rationalize our life, our habits, our preferences, and reinforce these patterns of suffering. It's a commitment to clear seeing that I think is pretty radical, actually, and actually pretty painful in my experience. At times in my life, a commitment to non-self-deception, a commitment to truthfulness has been very painful because I'm not always lying about things to myself to just have personal gain or to make people like me, but to avoid pain, to avoid fear. Because if I told the truth about this addiction that I have in my life, then that means I'm going to have to do something about it. And I don't know how to live without that. So I find that dishonesty is a really interesting thing. And as a therapist, I see this all the time, is that people come into my office and they want to pay me to talk about transparently their life in a very unfiltered way, yet still 4 or 5, 6 months into therapy, I find out some astronomically important thing about this person's life that they've not been talking about. No judgment. I have been there several times. We protect self-deception because of pain, I think, a lot of times. I've also found people enter into the therapy office and realize that they've been holding on to a marriage for 5 years, for a decade, for 15 years, 20 years for the sake of their kids. And confronting that truth is painful. Not even their own pain that they maybe don't want to feel, but the pain of their children. And talk about, being a parent, talk about attachment, right? So the Buddha's not just saying willy-nilly, have no attachments and you won't suffer, man. He's saying, no, where there is attachment, there's often a reason for that clinging. A fear, a pain, and that we've got to open with compassion. And sometimes kind of having this commitment to non-self-deception starts with grief. And to include that as a part of potentially our quest for liberation. If I'm doing the right thing, then why does it hurt so bad? You ever felt that way? And I say that because I guarantee there's at least one person that's in that right now, in here. And there's nothing wrong with you if it hurts so bad to stand up for what's true for you right now. And all of your doubts, maybe you're doing the wrong thing. Maybe you are. Are you trying your best? Are you loving yourself through the pain that you're in? I think that's what I'm aiming for, The worst thing I've ever felt when I've been in moments like that in my life is feeling alone in them. So just so you know, if you're one of these people that's in that, you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. Standing up for your truth and doing what you need to take care of yourself, even if you don't know it's what you need to do to take care of yourself, you're trying. So sometimes these events of self-deception have these kind of quite dramatic moments of realization. And that's not always the case. I think of like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. I do think we get like a couple quests in life that are particularly painful learning quests. And also there are these existential truthfulness, right? The last quest, and I don't say this in jest, no intention to rhyme there, is death also. We know the last one. And we also know that quest around the truth of death is going to exist in the people we love around us, losing people in this lifetime. And so some of these truths are big truths. And there's pain, and there's difficulty, and there's sadness, and there's grief. And I don't think the goal is to say, oh, non-attachment, man. Now, I think that the grief is where the compassion lies. But there's also smaller ways that I self-deceive. And this is where the Buddha gives us this practice of mindfulness. To look into the mind and to see how powerful our perceptions are, how powerful the ability of the mind to rationalize is. Y'all, it is incredibly fucking powerful how much the mind will rationalize whatever it wants to. That's been my experience. I heard a Dharma teacher share, I think from a neuroscientist, that said that humans think that they live their lives like scientists, but instead they live their lives like trial lawyers. And I don't think she was trying to knock trial lawyers. I think her point was that when a scientist does a controlled trial, they truly do not know what they'll find. They're open. And when a trial lawyer is on a case, they often start at the result they want and work their way back. And that is my experience of how my mind works a lot of the time. I start from my view of what I believe to be true, and I gather evidence based on it. And I don't even consciously do that. I can watch my mind do it. So these micro moments of self-deception, the Buddha is inviting us to explore our patterns of thought and looking at our perception, looking at our views, looking at the ways that we think. I've shared this quote a lot. It's from Bhikkhu Bodhi in his book, The Noble Eightfold Path. He says, this is about gathering evidence to support a view. He says, whether formulated or not, expressed or maintained in silence, our views have far-reaching influence. They structure your perception, order your values, crystallize into the framework through which you interpret to yourself the whole meaning of your being in the world. He says what's needed is knowledge of things not only based on a view, but as they really are. He says not merely conceptual knowledge as an idea, but perceptual knowledge, a knowing which is a seeing. This type of seeing develops into wisdom and enables us to grasp things more how they are in actuality, in reality, directly and immediately, more free from the screen of ideas, views, and assumptions that your mind usually sets up between itself and what's actually real. Mindfulness helps us to look at how the mind creates stories. how it creates these solid senses of self-narrative that we suffer over. When we're comparing ourselves, when we're judging ourselves, judging others, these narratives that the mind creates that says this person is this way. And you know who gets most of the flack? This person my mind creates that's me. A moment of judgment, a moment of comparison, a moment of dishonesty. One of the most self-centered versions of this perceptual bias in my brain is my shame. The part of, and I'm not shaming you for having shame, I'm just saying it's incredibly selfish mind state, I've noticed. But it's not shame, and it's not selfish in the sense of I'm better than, it's selfish in the sense of I'm worse than. And the way I describe it, I had this really rude awakening to this on a retreat. And I think I've shared this kind of generally, but this was a real experience. I was on a retreat with a teacher that I really love, with Ajahn Suchito, and I look up to this guy. I love him. He's been a monk for almost 50 years. He doesn't teach with financial benefit. He only wears one pair of clothes, that's all he owns. It's I love this guy, I respect this guy. And at the end of the retreat, people were sharing appreciations. And I had this feeling, it wasn't real, but it was this perceptual delusion break in my consciousness where it felt like everyone was sharing love and everyone's body was moving closer to him. It's like a trippy psychedelic movie where the room gets longer. I had this perceptual feeling, it was just my mind creating it, that I was moving further to the back of the room and everyone else was moving closer to him. And that there was this circle of love and everyone else was included in it and I was sitting just outside of it. It's weird to actually see how much emotion that brings up, how much of that experience goes on in here. And so even examining, looking at the delusion of not good enough, not belonging, and all the ways that I gather evidence to support that view. And y'all, I've gone beyond gathering evidence. I've gathered physical evidence. I've gone out and created evidence to corroborate the belief that I'm not a good person. One of the beautiful things, a beautiful perspective that I find in the Buddhist teaching, it's again more of a Mahayana and Vajrayana concept, less of a Theravada concept, but I found it in the early Buddhist texts, is this idea that we all have Buddha nature. And you don't have to believe it, you don't have to know what it is, who cares? But you have it, so congratulations, you have it. And that all of this stuff that's kind of causing our suffering, all these kind of stories of who we are and who other people are, this kind of perceptual stuff that we believe ourselves to be, is covering up the Buddha nature. And the word in the early Buddhist text is nawarana, which means covering. That your true nature is not this or that, or, that it's being covered up by self-deception, by these hindrances, as the Buddha really teaches them, that come and trick the mind into thinking that's what you are. And so really briefly, because we're talking about the micro and we're talking about mindfulness, in mindfulness practice we can start to observe not just these narratives that come up, but also these mind states. These mind states of reactivity. The first is, real quick, the Buddha says that your essential nature is like a still, clear pond. Like a pool of water. That's your essential nature. It's not permanent. It's still flowing and moving. You as a person are a verb, not a noun, for all those that were thinking about not self just then. So you're not a permanent thing, but you're this still forest pool. And all these, as Ajahn Chah says, all these strange and wonderful things come and drink from the pool, and they cover it up. And sometimes the pool gets colored with dye. Sometimes the pool is boiling. Sometimes the pool is covered with algae and moss. Sometimes the pool is being whipped with the wind. And sometimes the pool is murky. And these represent the 5 hindrances. So the pool that's covered with dye is the hindrance of sensual desire, or craving. So sometimes what we get caught in self-deception around is that we seek the immediacy of feeling good over the longevity of happiness, the sustainability of peacefulness. We do what feels good now. Any of y'all know what I'm talking about? Okay. So this, I feel like, is a pretty simple one. And it's, again, we want to look at our relationship to, it's the pattern of the heart and the mind. So it's not to say ice cream's bad. It's to say, am I kind of reaching towards this thing to try to avoid something? And that happens a lot. And so he says this is like your essence, your nature, the pool that's been colored with dye. And the second is, the flip side of the coin is aversion or ill will. And rather than reaching for something, we're trying to push something away that we don't want to feel or that we don't want to be with. It's like, I know boundaries are real, so put a bookmark there, but it's like not inviting someone that we are annoyed by to something because it's like, I don't really want to have a bad time. Or maybe it's just that kind of internal aversion. Just, hating the moment sitting in the DMV. And maybe we're doing both. We're hating that moment and grasping for another one on our phone. And again, it's not a judgment. It's nothing's inherently wrong with the DMV. I mean, systematically maybe, but nothing's inherently wrong with a phone. But looking at our relationship to these things, how we grasp and push away. Does that make sense? So that pushing away is like the water is boiling. I think the water is this kind of clarity. The third and the fourth hindrance or covering are lethargy and restlessness. Lethargy being covered in algae and restlessness being whipped by the wind. So this is how kind of the internal energy of the mind can stir us into reactivity and sometimes even self-deception. I know when I get depressed, I sleep a lot. Again, it's not my fault. It's just I don't really like this being life, so I'm going to sleep a little bit more. Or, I have a pretty neurotic, ancestry, and I can also get in this restless habit of just always just hurtling from one plan and obsessive thought to the next, and this kind of monkey mind, as they call it, swinging from one thought to the next thought to the next thought. And the last hindrance, the last covering is doubt. And doubt is described as this kind of just pool that's full of mud, like a swamp that sucks you in. It's like a quicksand. And the Buddha says that doubt is the most formidable of all of the hindrances. It's the hardest one to see, and it's the one that will stick you the most. Because it's the one that denies your true nature. It's the one that says, I am this, or I am not capable of that, or it's kind of that part that when we're trying with courage to make a change or to embrace life as it is, that part that says, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I just can't do it. And so, real quick, a word on trust. I think the goal is not to know with certainty what the right way and the wrong way is. I don't think we're looking for that type of clarity. I think the goal is to guide our awareness towards our experience and to look. Oh, is this craving here? Is this aversion here? Is this lethargy and complacency here? Is this restlessness and worry here? Is this self-doubt and fear that's lurking here? And to approach whatever decisions we make in our life with more intentionality, not with certainty. There's no right thing. Welcome to Buddhism. There's no right thing. It's a relief and it kind of sucks. It's like my mind is always looking for what's the right thing. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's no right thing, there's no wrong thing. Sure, we have a sense of shared social norms. Please, we should probably live within those to some degree. Keeps social cohesion and makes sure we're operating on some basis. But we're trying to be more intentional and more clear at looking at guiding our behavior with loving kindness, with compassion, with sympathetic joy, and with equanimity, with wisdom. So how do we develop clarity? It's through mindfulness. Mindfulness is this capacity that neuroscientists would call it metacognition. It's a really wonderful, phenomenal capacity of the human brain. We can be aware of our thoughts, not just in our thoughts. We can be aware of the mind states and moods. We can be aware of the sensations of the body. We can tolerate discomfort. We can talk about our discomfort. We can meet pain. We can expand our window of tolerance towards pain. That's pretty cool. Doesn't mean we're always sitting with it all the time. Sometimes we're healthily distracting in a skillful way. So there's no right or wrong, but we're trying to be aware, and mindfulness is the how. To cultivate that, you can practice that. The Buddha says there's two ways to develop wisdom. Continuous awareness, mindfulness, and the words of a wise friend. It's the shortest list in Theravada Buddhism. It is. A list of two. And it's on developing wisdom. Continuous awareness and the words of a wise friend. So another way that we step out of self-deception is through community. And we know this, right? When we can share with other people the things that we feel like failures about and we feel are the embarrassing things and the things that expose our weakness, which is just another way to say vulnerability. Vulnere meaning susceptible to woundedness. When we expose that susceptibility, I'm not perfect, and we share it, there's honesty, there's immediacy, there's a possibility of love, there's a possibility of support, there's a possibility of rejection. But there's more possibility when we share than when it stays between my ears. That's been my experience. So how do we develop? Stepping out of self-deception, mindfulness, words of a wise friend. I also think having a beginner's mind. It's more of a Zen Buddhist concept that I really love, which is even as an exercise when we're in conversation or when we're going throughout our day, is to trying to take other people's perspectives. Not to endlessly never make a decision about anything, because I can do that too. But to try to kind of be like, well, I could do it this way or I could do it that way. Or maybe they were doing this or maybe they were doing that. I can ask more questions. I can be open to experiences rather than always thinking I know what it is that I'm experiencing. I try one of my favorite walking meditation practices, like in life, not walking meditation, but in life meditation practices, is when my mind has a thought that's kind of a concrete thought, I'll just say maybe. And it's one of my favorite practices when I'm conscious of doing it. It's not no, it's not you're an idiot, Andrew. It's just like maybe. Maybe that person didn't like you, I don't know. Huh. Maybe you could ask them. Maybe you could think they did like you until they tell you. Maybe if you feel something weird later on, you could ask them then. Maybe. There's a lot of possibilities. Right? What do they say? In a beginner's mind, there are endless possibilities. In the expert, there are few. Something like that. So that's all I have on truthfulness. I'm interested in what you have on truthfulness.
What's up, y'all? Reverend Mikey Noshel here from Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for checking us out. Do me a favor, please like and subscribe. And if you feel moved to leave a donation, you can do so at wildheartmeditationcenter.org or the Venmo link in the description. Peace and love.